My name is Lester Brooks. I teach in the history department at Anne Arundel Community College in Arnold, Maryland.
My name is Susan Firestone. I'm a retired patent attorney and I'm from Fort Wayne, Indiana.
I'm Tim Moore. I'm from the Center for the Study of the American Constitution at the University of Wisconsin, but born in Rochester, Indiana. So I feel like I'm back home.
Will you introduce yourselves?
Of course. Good morning, judges. We are Unit 2 from Team Indiana from Hamilton Southeastern High School in Fishers, Indiana. My name is Shannon Helinski, and next year I intend on studying history at the University of Dayton.
Hi, my name is Greg Rose, and I plan on studying computer science at the University of Louisville.
Hello, my name is Maddie Harris, and I plan on studying international relations at Indiana University.
Hi, my name is Ankit Joju, and I plan on studying computer science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Uh-oh. You get a point for that. Tim likes that.
Now, is that true? I mean, is it really?
Yeah, good choice.
Okay, and your teacher?
Our coaches are Miss Chandler and Miss Kane.
All right, you ready to get started? Okay, let's go. Unit 2, question number 1. What were the major disagreements among the 55 delegates during the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, and how were they resolved? What issues, if any, were not resolved, and what were the consequences? What changes, if any, should be made to the Constitution? Okay, let's hear you.
George Washington exclaimed,
It is too probable that no plan we propose will be adopted.
Many issues sparked disagreement. James Madison believed the executive should serve for 7 years, while Alexander Hamilton thought the president should serve for life. William Patterson disagreed with both, believing the presidency should consist of multiple people.
Despite disagreements, most delegates believed the executive's main role was to enforce the laws of Congress, and they should be able to be impeached. Eventually, it was agreed that the executive should be a single person, serve a 4-year term without limits, and be elected by an electoral college as explained by Hamilton in Federalist 68.
Convention delegates disputed the appropriate balance between state and national power when crafting federalism. Delaware delegate Gunnar Bedford supported the Virginia plan where Congress could legislate in all cases where states were incompetent. The Constitution resolved the balance by adding the supremacy clause in Article 6.
The Commerce Compromise allowed taxes on imports, but prohibited taxing exports. However, Delegate John Dickinson advocated a ban on slave importation. Southern delegates opposed this idea, resulting in a stalemate. The Constitution protected slave importation until 1808, but domestic slave trade continued until passage of the 13th Amendment.
Several issues remained unresolved after the convention. Delegates crafted the 3/5 Compromise and the Article 4 Fugitive Slave Clause to maintain Southern support. Postponing slavery discussions allowed it to become foundational to Southern life, leading to the secession of the Southern states when they believed their way of life was under attack.
Native Americans and their rights remained unresolved. Article 1, Section 8 details how Congress can make treaties with tribes, but no specific protections or rights exist in the Constitution for natives. With a lack of representation and rights, Native Americans faced expulsion from their lands, such as the Trail of Tears. Only when President Coolidge signed the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924 and President Johnson signed the Indian Civil Rights Act of 1968 did Native Americans receive representation and protection.
As our country progresses, the Constitution should as well. I would amend the Constitution to abolish the Electoral College. In recent years, the popular vote and Electoral College have not aligned, with a few swing states deciding election outcomes. It is time that the people pick their president, not states.
I believe that a talking filibuster needs to be amended to the Constitution since the allowance of virtual filibusters in the 1970s. The talking filibuster should be required to be germane, and the number of votes needed for closure should remain at 60. This would help limit the amount of filibusters performed in the Senate and make any filibusters performed relevant.
I think the Equal Rights Amendment should be added to the Constitution. While the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment has been beneficial in protecting some rights, this is not specific or permanent enough. It is high time both men and women were treated equally under the law.
I believe in order to maintain the integrity of the democratic process, federal election campaign finance restrictions need to be amended to the Constitution. Following Citizens United v. FEC, corporations and unions were allowed to spend unlimited money on political candidates through PACs, resulting in such groups significantly influencing elections. As journalist John Maxwell said,
Democracy is not something that is achieved. It is a work in progress.
this now concludes our written testimony and we're ready for your questions.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now we'll have follow-up questions from the judges. Tim?
Yeah, I'd like to know a little bit about how representation at the convention, whether you think that that was a contentious issue.
I would absolutely state that representation at the convention was a very contentious issue, with the anti-federalists and federalists stating on, for example, if slaveholders should, if their slaves should count as full people or not be counted at all in terms of state representation, obviously landing on the Three-Fifths Compromise eventually.
I would agree with my colleague Ankit here. Some delegates even walked out. Luther Martin walked out when the Three-Fifths Compromise was being discussed. Representation was a very contentious issue, and the Great Compromise, combining the Virginia and the New Jersey plan, finally landed on a system of representation, but it was certainly a contentious issue.
Well, in addition to that, representation was first brought up at the Constitutional Convention on the fourth day, before even most of the delegates had arrived. It was brought up by Delegate Edmund Randolph, and it was hotly contested for the entire day. And that was all that they talked about that entire day. And all that was agreed upon was that they did not want to continue with the Articles of Confederation's representation.
Furthermore, Charles Pinckney suggested a somewhat radical plan of having one representative per 1,000 people. And that's kind of the ideas that were shown, that like we should have more delegates per person that we even have today.
Thank you.
Well, we talked about contentious issues for regarding representation. Were contentious issues relating to the executive power at the convention?
That was certainly a contentious issue. There were many people that wanted different forms of representation. For example, Alexander Hamilton, in his Hamilton plan, actually proposed essentially a monarchy where there would be a very strong, powerful executive, whereas many delegates who would later form the Anti-Federalists were very much against this idea.
The executive was a very contentious issue going into the convention. Look at it, they were coming off the Articles of Confederation, a system of government that didn't even have an executive branch. They didn't know what they wanted their executive to look like, and they certainly didn't know how much power they wanted to give them.
Furthermore, we can look at, furthermore, in Anti-Federalist number 48, we can look at that Leonidas writes that the current federal government and the centralized power within it allows for an executive to have unending power if the Senate is able to cooperate with them. And we can see throughout history that that has mostly been the case, with the Senate and Congress giving more and more power to the president over time.
Isn't it time for a multi-executive branch rather than putting all the responsibilities on one person?
I would say we already kind of have a multi-executive branch. Looking at the cabinet and the cabinet positions. And the cabinet positions also must be confirmed by the Senate, so it's not unlimited power given to the executive to be able to appoint them. The president is really just the one who represents our nation and in the global sense.
Additionally, the point of having multiple executives is to have checks and balances on that executive branch. However, we do have that, as discussed by Hamilton in Federalist 68, we have those checks and balances on the executive through our legislative and judicial branch.
Do you feel quite confident that the cabinet always serves as a check and balance on that single executive?
I would say no. I don't think the cabinet is necessarily always a adequate check on the presidential power, mostly because the cabinet itself is one appointed by the president with senatorial approval, but can just be fired at without any Senate approval at all. So I think the cabinet is invested to agree with the president on most issues.
I would have to agree with my colleague Ankit here. And I would suggest maybe with recent administration's treatment of cabinet positions, hiring and firing at will, maybe we should have a process in place for firing as well, and more protections for cabinet members so that they don't have to be just so-called yes men and can be a check on the president's power.
You mentioned that, one of you mentioned that you would abolish the Electoral College. My question to you, why do we even have an Electoral College in the first place?
The Electoral College is there to give more power to the states. The founders had a deep mistrust of the general American populace. So that way the populace elects the state representatives, and the representatives select electors for the Electoral College, who therefore choose the president. So it limits the voice of the people and increases the voice of the states.
Hamilton, again, as my colleague said, Hamilton explains this in Federalist 84. He talks about his deep mistrust for the American people and how unqualified they were, and how this medium of chosen representatives would then be able to ensure that the common good is protected for all citizens.
Should there have been a compromise on slavery at the convention, or just resolve that issue right then and there instead of letting it blossom and explode over the next generations?
Ideally, I would say I would have wanted the slavery issue to be solved at the convention, but the problem is that with the major disagreements between the several framers of the Constitution regarding slavery, such as between George Mason and George Clinton, or Edmund Randolph, all these founders disagreed with the method that the Constitution was going about in resolving or somewhat dodging the question of slavery with the Federal Fugitive Slave Act or 3/5 Compromise.
I would agree with my colleague Ankit, but I would also like to point out that our country wasn't even formed at the time. It was too fragile, really, to begin the discussion on slavery. And the members of the Constitutional Convention are not only at fault. There was the gag rule imposed, and this was generations of Americans sweeping the issue of slavery under the rug, allowing it to become foundational to Southern life, so that it eventually, when it was challenged, it exploded into the Civil War.
Okay.
Let me make a proposition. You know, those guys in Philadelphia were naughty. They didn't do what they were supposed to do. They wrote a whole new constitution. Should I modify my opinion of these delegates?
Well, I'd have to say that they were patriotic. The Artists Confederation were not working. It was shown that they weren't working. We can look at the Annapolis Convention, which was supposed to be just between a few states dealing with the trade issues on the Potomac River, and it exploded into this idea of maybe we need a new government. And Madison came to the convention with a fully fledged Virginia plan already written out that he gave to Edmund Randolph to propose. I'm sorry, may I finish my?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I don't think that we can change our opinion of our founders because we were founded by revolutionaries. That's what these members of the Constitutional Convention were, just in a different form.
Thank you. Now we'll have feedback from the judges. Okay, Tim.
Yeah, I really, I mean, you took me around the world and even got in John Dickinson there. I appreciate that. I mean, your background, your historical information is really good. I was a little nervous in the 4-minute presentation that you didn't reference the representation debates, but so that's why right out of the chute. And maybe that was you baited and hooked me on that to ask that first question about representation. If that was your approach, congratulations. it was good to hear that you did understand the Virginia and New Jersey issue of what to represent states or individuals. I also thought your reference to hey, Hamilton had a plan for the executive. You want that one? So I appreciated that one. And also, I make a little suggestion here. Maybe, and I think you're onto something here when you reference the cabinet may be functioning as the multiple executive, but also I'd like you to consider maybe the agencies too. The independent agencies in some ways can, I think for many political scientists, they would say we do have a plural executive. We got hundreds of executives with all of these agencies and the power that they have to create codes and enforce the codes. So I would also add another layer to your argument that the agencies may be that multiple executive. But on the whole, I think your use of evidence is really good. And I appreciated the conversation. And frankly, I wanted to continue, Shannon, because you said they were revolutionaries in a different way. Ooh! I want to continue. I want to continue that. So I think I know where you would head with that. But that's that's a great way to conclude to keep me interested. So yeah, great. Thank you.
I also want to imagine you shoot with a nice quote from George Washington, and you ended with a quote from Maxwell, so it was nicely structured there. You had a lot of interesting things that I wanted to ask you, and you weren't afraid, and actually each of you had a different opinion on what you would change in the U.S. Constitution, which I found fascinating, and I wanted to go into more of what that was, but we only have 8 minutes, so there was a lot to cover. I enjoyed your presentation very much. I enjoyed the fact too that you did actually, when you were taking, I think you hooked Tim there on the representation, and also mentioned then counting slaves as people, and you had a whole slew of walked out of the convention or had other ideas or had other things that they mentioned. So nicely done.
I too have to say that you covered a lot of ground. You covered a lot of ground. You started with George Washington, as Susan said. Interesting, no plan will be adopted. Not very confident, but nevertheless, coming from George Washington, you have to sort of stop and take note. But then you went on. You talked about the executive and what type of executive there should be. The whole impeachment. That's another issue that certainly we could get into. The Electoral College, and you talked about that. The whole idea of citizenship, Indians, and you trace the Native Americans and the controversy that we have with that, the Trail of Tears, and the 1924 Citizenship National Origins Act. I like the comment, democracy is a work in progress. And so, as you know, over the last few years, it has been a difficult work in progress and struggling. The idea of Madison you brought out and in supporting evidences, and you agreed. There was this agreement with colleagues. You were able to share your thoughts, and I like that sharing of ideas. So very good presentation.